All right, hello everybody, and welcome to our Friday Night Magic Modern at GameSwap Mason. Brought to you by Top Deck Productions. I'm Zachary Creamer, and I'm here tonight with Connor Sloan.
How we doing?
I'm all right. We got a good one for you here. Nate Lang is on Grixis Delver, and Austin Fridley is on Affinity. Connor, who do you think is favored in this matchup?
Well, it really depends on what sort of build Nate Lang is running. There are a lot of different sort of Grixis Delver builds that I've seen. I mean, based on the street wraith, I'd say, this is obviously Grixis Shadow, hopefully, but we don't know. Some people like to play a lot of Fatal Pushes, some people don't. Some people like to play more or fewer mainboard Kolaghan's Commands, which is definitely a good card in this matchup.
Yeah, I would say that this is more likely than not Grixis Shadow.
It looks like we saw some anglers and baubles.
Yeah, that's Shadow for sure. It's the most popular Grixis build at the time. So that was a Thought Scour, and Grixis decks use the Thought Scour to dig for the cards that are relevant in their deck while also filling up their graveyard. And what this lets them do is it lets them see the cards that they want to see and lets them pump out a Delve threat. In this case, we're going to see Gurmag Angler and potentially Tasigur. These Grixis Shadow decks, they're either all in on the Gurmag Angler, like 4 copies, or they'll do a 3-1 split. Yeah,
with Thought Scour and in combination with the Delve threats, we generally see it just being a Dark Ritual that replaces itself. We put 3 cards in the graveyard and then a card into the hand. So
on Austin's side, that is a turn 2 Master of Ethereum, which is a strong start. It makes the Vault Scourge a 2/2, flying lifelink. It's a hell of a rate on that card.
Oh, it really is. But in this sort of matchup, we see more often than not these Grixis Shadow decks. You know, you're going to get in there with these 2 in the air over and over and over, and then Grixis Shadow is going to come out of nowhere and hit you with a 10/10.
Yeah, the lifelink on that card isn't as relevant in this matchup as it is in other matchups, but you know, it's still a nice little bonus.
I definitely agree. So it looks like that Scourge came down on turn 1 with life.
Yeah.
No, he looks like he played black mana for it actually, because he has that spring.
He's at 18.
Right.
He used, he played a land, played the Springleaf Drum, played, there's something underneath the Springleaf Drum.
That's an Ornithopter.
It's an Ornithopter, and then the Ornithopter played the Vault Scourge, and here we are. And the Springleaf Drum and Ornithopter are tapped now because he used them to pay for Master.
Faithless Looting is not a card that I've seen often coming out of the Grixis Shadow decks, but recently more and more.
Yeah.
Faithless Looting, as we are discovering over time, is proving to be one of the better cards in this format.
Yeah, much like Thought Scour, it fills up the graveyard for the Delve threats, and it just digs deeper. It lets you see the cards you're trying to see over a long enough game. And the Grixis Shadow deck will flood out. It's not trying to hit lands 4 and 5. Definitely not 5. And yeah, here's the namesake Gurmag Angler. Zombie fish.
Yeah, so we see him, he's delving away, he's making his decisions very meticulously. So we still have relevant cards like Snapcaster Mage that we want to be respectful of what's in our own graveyard.
Yeah. Snapcaster Mage keeps cards in the graveyard relevant. Cards like Kolaghan's Command can buy back a creature.
Absolutely.
And if he's playing a Tasigur and we get to the very late game with lands, you know, 4 lands, end of the turn, he can buy back a card.
So if you can see what Nate decided to leave in the graveyard, we've got, you know, a handful of spells. There's some lands that he left in there. I'm a little bit questionable about that, but there's a Snapcaster Mage there buried under them all. So we definitely have some respect for his own Kolaghan's Commands there.
I think the lands, what the lands tell me is that he has Tasigur in his deck. So it makes it so that, like, when he
can sculpt his...
Yeah, he can... Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
it narrows the choices. Because when you're giving your opponent a choice, you want it to favor you as often as it possibly can.
Yeah, you want your opponent's decision to net you the same benefit, or, you know, you want your opponent to be choosing of two equal evils, basically.
So Austin played a Steel Overseer, very powerful card. And I think
Nate answered it with
a lightning bolt that was in his hand. He fetch shocked and hit it with a lightning bolt, which is good. You can't. He needed to do that now or during his turn. You can't let the Affinity player untap with a number of their threats, but especially that one. It's one of those cards you need to deal with. Like, so a lot of times people like to wait until the last possible second to use their removal. Steel Overseer doesn't give you that kind of time.
Steel Overseer puts the pressure on. You need to answer it, or you need to plan for a board state in which it is sticking.
Yeah.
What it does is it just creates a board state that's very difficult to answer with cards like Lightning Bolt. See, if he would have untapped with that Steel Overseer, well, that Edge Champion is now solidly out of bolt range, and it is the main factor in the game. That's his answer to Gurmag. I think we got the stream frozen a little bit. Can we?
Let's get a quick refresh. See where we're at. Okay.
Thank you.
Nate's still thinking. Excellent.
Nothing has changed. Blue decks at their finest.
Yeah. I like Nate's land suite here. He has one of each shock. This is typically where the shadow decks are trying to be when they have 3 lands. You know, one of each.
Not that you need to respect it much in this matchup, but moving forward on Nate's 4th and 5th, etc. land drops, if he has access to fetch lands to play, that's generally what you want to keep up. The thing about the Grixis shadow decks, they suffer very greatly to land destruction. So even Ghost Quarters, the decks generally play 1 or 2 basic lands. So you really want to keep those fetch lands available after about your 2nd or 3rd land, just to make sure that you can keep your colors in the face of land destruction.
We have a Arcbound Ravager.
Solidly one of the best cards in the deck.
Oh yeah, Arcbound Ravager is excellent. Arcbound Ravager is an extremely powerful card. It allows you to go all in on a resource at any given time.
And it looks like we've got a Snap Bolt coming out for that Arcbound Ravager.
Yeah, and Nate is just seeing an abundance of removal. The shadow decks are main deck a little removal light. They typically play some split between Bolt and Push. Seems like Nate is favoring the Bolt.
I'm a fan of that as well. I think Lightning Bolt's just a solidly better card than
Lightning Bolt is strong right now because of things like humans. Particular, you need to be able to answer Mantis Rider.
Absolutely.
And like Fatal Push doesn't always answer that.
Yeah, there's just too big of a handful of creatures that are popular in this format that just will go right around that Fatal Push.
So the shadow decks are favoring bolts right now, and then they also play Dismember.
All right, so it looks like Austin is coming in for 7. He's coming in with a 7 power and toughness Master of Ethereum, which is what I was referring to.
Yeah. The Ink Moth Nexus is animated.
Oh, looks like we have what's one more then. So we've got Bolt coming in.
That doesn't really change very much. The counter just goes, so it's still a...
So that play was power neutral for Austin. He did not gain or lose any sort of advantage off of that, with the exception of now he does not have an Arcbound Ravager on the table.
This was, yeah.
Which is great to have. You know, every turn that you untap with an Arcbound Ravager is a turn that you are gaining incremental advantage, in my opinion.
Basically, he paid 2 for a +1/+1 counter on the Master of Ethereum.
And that's not terrible.
No, it's not. Yeah,
especially
like
because he got a card out of Nate's hand as well.
Arcbound Ravager is, yeah, exactly. 2 mana for a +1/+1 counter and a card. It's a good exchange, I think, on Austin's part. This game is going to be decided by Nate's ability or inability to deal with the Master of Ethereum.
Absolutely.
It's just too big of a threat. Unless Nate has a main deck call against command, his out is Fatal Push, and he needs a permanent to leave the battlefield.
I think Nate's game plan here, he's pretty much stabilized. 9 life is a really good life to stabilize at from the Shadow player. When you think of it in terms of the actual Shadow itself coming down, 9 is good because now he can, as long as he's not damaging himself too severely, he can resist a few hits from any given of the Affinity's threats and still stay alive, and then really swing back with that heavy Shadow. Now, in this scenario, Nate does not have a Death Shadow. He's got a Snapcaster Mage in hand. and he's got a plethora of answers in the yard. So he's got at least one turn of tempo here, but his draws really need to line up over the next turn or two in order for this game to swing his way.
We saw him. I always forget this one. Stubborn Denial.
Yeah, Stubbs is a real card. It's Force Spike with conditionally. You don't have the option to pay the mana when you've got a creature with power 4 or greater.
We saw him Stubborn Denial, the Cranial Plating, and the Cranial Plating really just ends the game there. He puts it on a flyer.
It turns any given creature into Master of Ethereum. It's great.
Yeah. But we saw a Ceremonious Rejection there, or rather a Stubborn Denial there. And then a Chump Block with a Snapcaster Mage.
And then we see him delving for another Gurmag Angler as well, which 2 Gurmag Anglers is definitely a sufficient answer to that Master of Ethereum. Because if we look very closely,
it disincentivizes Austin from attacking. He attacks.
Absolutely. Because right now it is a, let's see.
Well, then not really. Like Nate has to block. Like that's lethal. I would have attacked with the. He can double block and trade. But then he's just left with 1 Gurmag Angler. So I guess that's fair.
But in the absence of that trade, Austin would have been left with 2 man-lands and a 0 power flyer.
Right. It's definitely worth defending the... it's definitely worth protecting the Master here. The Master is what's winning him the game. Even if it's not attacking, it's adding 3 power to the board, whereas ordinarily he would only have...
So
and there we go.
Nate swings in to see if he can get Austin to make a mistake, and then he scoops it up when Austin makes the correct play. Now, this would have been the critical turn for one of those 2 Arcbound Ravagers, and if they had stayed alive, because we noticed, Austin had 3 to 4 dead cards out on the field. He had those Springleaf Drums that weren't really doing anything at that point in the game, and those just turn into damage. They go straight onto the Arcbound, and if the Arcbound doesn't get through, something else does with the Arcbound's counter. So that's the turn that the game would have just been over if Nate had not dealt with those Arcbound Ravagers.
You bring up a good point. Affinity plays all of these like mana cards. They have 17 lands. They play 4 Springleaf Drum, 4 Mox Opal. Early on, these let you pump out your threats super early.
Absolutely.
Super great. On curve, ahead of curve. It just gives you a lot of options early on. Like, with the correct draw, you can play your 2 mana spells on turn 1.
Which is what we saw here. We saw a turn 1 Scourge without paying life. I don't believe he paid life for that. I could be remembering that.
I think he paid life, but he was able to play. But he was able to play. But he did have 2 mana that turn. He just didn't have 2 mana simultaneously.
Okay.
He had 1 mana to play the Springleaf Drum, and then a 0-drop, and then played another 1-drop.
Yeah.
So he had 2 mana on turn 1, just not at the same time. Now some draws, like if he had a Mox Opal there, he would have been able to play the Arcbound Ravager or the Steel Overseer turn 1.
Right. That opener, however, is what let him slam that Master of Ethereum on the second turn.
On turn 2.
We've got the turn 1, into the 0-drop creature and the Springleaf Drum in order to power out the
with 2 lands.
quote 1 mana creature.
Springleaf Drum fills a role in this deck that's akin to like Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic.
Except more often than not, it gets haste.
But late game, and this is where the Arcbound comes in. Late game, when those cards aren't doing anything and you're drawing like your 4th, 5th, 6th mana source,
you get to recycle them all into damage.
Exactly, and you can go all in on a resource. Your opponent's tapped out.
Absolutely.
You've maybe done some chip damage here and there. You get to go all in on a resource, either with regular damage or infect. That's a line.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you get the Inkmoth Nexus coming in for the infect kill with the Arcbound Ravager is all too common. I wouldn't even call it a secondary win condition. It's win condition 1.5 of this deck.
Again, in certain matchups, it is the primary win condition.
Absolutely, yeah. When you have decks that are playing at a fair pace of play, and well, you get to power out your whole game really early, but if you have an Inkmoth out, you can just run those fair decks over with your Arcbound Ravager into the Inkmoth Nexus.
Some decks
not even care what they're doing.
Some decks, their only removal is damage based, and it has a ceiling. Like if your primary removal is Bolt, you can make the Inkmoth Nexus a 4/4 or a 5/5, and it's out of range. 2 hits with a 5/5 Inkmoth Nexus, the game's over.
Absolutely. What do you think's coming out of Austin's sideboard for this match?
Well, I remember when I played Affinity. I played Affinity during the season of Shadow and Eldrazi Tron, and Bitter Blossom was an excellent card as a one-of. It just gives you 1,000,000 blockers. You pay 1 life, you block their guy. And then on your turn, you make another one. I'll pay a life, block your 8/8. So I would be really interested to see if Austin is packing the Bitter Blossom tech. It's not common so much anymore, but I mean, we still have big decks like that. Like it gives you blockers for humans for days, or Hollow one. I always really liked seeing a single Bitter Blossom out of the Affinity sideboard.
And in this matchup, it would really do a lot more work than you would really expect it to. You know,
oh yeah,
paying 1 life every turn to jump block a Death Shadow is
it's an
incredible.
innocuous little card. Like it actually synergizes with your deck in a really weird way. Like the token comes in, and you can use that token that turn to use your Springleaf Drum.
Absolutely.
Gives you an endless supply of creatures to equip Cranial Plating to. It's great against spot removal, board wipe. It's not an artifact, and it doesn't make artifacts, but otherwise, it's really interesting. It's great in the grindy games.
So I'd like to talk about Nate's side of this match going into the second game. So what we see on board here is a Grim Lavamancer, which is an incredibly good card in this matchup. It's very obvious. You're filling up your graveyard.
Especially on the play.
Especially on the play. You're filling up your graveyard, and you know that Cranial Plating doesn't do anything to toughness, so Nate can, right now, kill that Signal Pest and take no damage.
He's not taking anything. Austin had to use his entire turn to get the Cranial Plating out and equip it, and now he's not going to take anything and lose his Signal Pest.
He might be taking 1 from the Battle Cry onto the Ornithopter. I'm not sure at what phase
No,
Nate
that's
is
true.
activating this.
That's true.
And here we have Nate explaining that it doesn't increase the toughness of the creature.
That would be insane if it did.
Another card that I saw in Nate's hand was Anger of the Gods, and I was really excited to see him
That's interesting.
fan his opening hand with that. That card does a ton of work here. Now, the only thing in Austin's deck that increases the toughness of any given creature is Master of Ethereum. And Master of Ethereum doesn't increase anything substantially enough to really protect from that anger. Anger is a 3-mana reset. It's basically damnation in this scenario.
I'm interested. I think it's interesting that Nate is playing the anger. I've seen different cards fill that role in the Grixis Shadow sideboard. Anger can be kind of hard to cast because Nate, I guess with the Faithless Looting version, they have a second Blood Crypt, but Nate has 2 of his 3 red sources out, and it necessitates that. That being said, in this matchup, it's not really much of a cost. So I like it. I've also seen Kozilek's return. I've seen what's the one from Battle for Zendikar?
Rolling Thunder.
No. Radiant Flames.
Radiant Flames.
Rolling Flames because you're a 3-color deck. There's also Engineered Explosives. There's a lot of different cards that can fill this role. But Anger of the Gods is just as valid as anything else. It's especially good against like Hollow One and Dredge cards, like decks where the Exile clause is very relevant. Not so much here, but
now here's
just
a card,
as good as anything else.
Here's a card out of Austin's sideboard I wasn't necessarily expecting. Rest in Peace. Now, what we've done here with this Rest in Peace is absolutely negate that Grim Lavamancer.
That is true.
That said, Austin is down a turn, and he only has 1 creature in play. Now, he does have that Cranial Plating, which is about to become really good with the absence of the Grim Lavamancer activation and a Cranial Plating.
Yeah, Rest in Peace is a card that we see out of almost any deck that can play white.
It's really great. It's one of the reasons that Green White-Tron was so big when it was, because we had decks like Shadow and Dredge coming back out of the woodwork. Green White-Tron was the Tron to go to because you could play Rest in Peace.
As a side note, though, the Rest in Peace turns off his own Arcbound Ravager. You know how that works?
Yeah, so Arcbound Ravager has to die, and the technical version of die is go from the graveyard from the battlefield. Now, with Rest in Peace in play, it is a replacement effect of any given creature going to any graveyard from the battlefield. So it doesn't actually, quote-unquote, die. It just goes straight to exile, so you don't get that trigger.
Yeah, that's why I would prefer a Nile Spellbomb or a
Relic.
A Relic of Progenitus. They're artifacts. You can just leave it. It adds to your artifact count until you need it.
Absolutely. So like a Relic of Progenitus in this scenario would have been so much better because you would have had, one fewer mana investment. That Master of Ethereum would be 1 power larger.
Here we see the sorry to interrupt you. Here we see the Kolaghan's Command.
The all-star of this matchup.
Huge game. Austin doesn't really have a board anymore. Nate's swinging in with the 1/1. He's got a 16-turn clock. But Nate doesn't have much of a. Yeah, but Austin doesn't have a board anymore, and that's the power of a card like Kolaghan's Command in these matchups. That Kolaghan's Command
is huge. Now, I'm not sure I liked Nate's decisions of target. I think that he would have been much better off shattering that cranial plating. And just leaving the Master of Ethereum. We saw the Master of Ethereum be big game in game 1. The Master of Ethereum is still easier to remove in this matchup. Nate doesn't run as many cards that can answer that cranial plating as he does cards that can answer the Master. Because you can still fatal push.
We didn't see all of the cards that he brought in.
This is true.
Nate seems to be on a more bolt-heavy build. And the hard cast of the Street Wraith. Okay, this is the reason to get up to 5 lands. Street Wraith has more text than pay 2 life cycle and draw a card. You get a 3/4 Swamp Walk.
Which is not relevant in this game.
Not unless Austin is playing the Swamp. Which he would be disincentivized from putting into play at this point. Typically, Affinity has 1 basic land, and that's a mountain, or in some cases, an island. The mountain is for like Galf Blast and most of your sideboard cards. But if you're on a Thoughtcast, more tempo build, counter magic out of the board, then you play the island, and it also helps make Master of Ethereum easier to cast. Most people play a mountain. But you do sometimes see islands. And I have even seen swamps. Swamps let you cast your Vault Scourge without paying life. It makes it easier to equip Cranial Plating and instant speed. And some sideboard cards, but mostly those things.
And here is another big play from Nate. We've got the second 3-mana spell that rocks this match, which is the Anger of the Gods. And it looks like Austin is going to concede. Looks like Austin's going to... Nate scooped up faster than Austin. I don't know who actually won that. But we definitely had that Anger of the God causing this game to end one way or another. Yeah, it looks like Austin
has seen enough. I can't exactly say I blame him.
For sure. I don't know if it was wrong. I don't know if it was right to concede at that moment, because the way I read that is, Anger of the God resolves. Austin loses his Vault Scourges, and
Nate loses a 1/1.
Nate loses his 1/1, but then Austin is left with just a Blink Moth, but Nate is left with nothing.
Yeah.
Nate has no game at that point.
He had a 3/4.
Unless he slams it.
He had a 3/4.
He did have the 3/4. I forgot about the 3/4.
Which, interestingly enough, survives the Anger.
The Anger, absolutely.
Did Austin have a man land there?
He did. He had a Blink Moth Nexus.
Okay. He can animate and equip. And that's a clock.
It's a Delver of Secrets at that point, really. It's a 3-mana or 3-power flyer. We had a moment of downtime. We missed it a minute ago. I want to go ahead and thank Sharon632 for subscribing. We didn't miss you. So, going into Game 3, do you think there are any sideboard changes? And I think I just saw the basic planes in Austin's deck while he was shuffling.
Basic planes. Okay, well...
And that's what I was thinking based on the Rest in Peace.
Yeah. The basic planes... It's funny, you can also... That's another line. The basic planes is indicative of wear and tear in the sideboard. A friend of mine does that. That way you can cast wear through a Stony Silence.
I was really big on
when they path you.
I was really big on your philosophy of Affinity sideboarding, is you wanted every of the 15 cards to say the word artifact on it somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's something that's kind of undermined. Every single card in the deck should be an artifact or synergize with artifacts, or at the very least have artifact on the card. Like I played artifact and enchantment destruction. I played natural state.
Natural state's good. It answers basically everything.
1 mana and it carries. Thank you, Raven19, for the follow. We didn't forget you. Natural state just takes care of every enchantment and artifact that you actually care about. I see Affinity decks play Ancient Grudge in that spot, and my issue with Ancient Grudge was the Shatter up front, like the 2 mana up front. That's basically your whole turn.
Absolutely.
So out of Nate, we see a turn 1 Grim Lavamancer again, and we've got 2 bobbles. He'll probably bobble Austin and then himself.
Bobble is such a silly card, and I say it's silly because we've got all these cards. What a lot of people say that they like about the Mishra's Bobble is that it's a second play set of free cantrips. It doesn't draw you a card until the next turn. The card's just undeniably good. I think it's really silly just because of all the little intricacies that it does. It gains you information but not much, and it draws you a card but not until the next turn.
Yeah, it lets you see
totally free.
It in conjunction with a fetch land has proven to be very like a nice little setup. You can, like, for example, here Nate is going to look at the top card of his library. If it's relevant, he
doesn't fetch.
He's not going to fetch. He'll wait for Austin's turn. He'll draw the relevant card, and then he'll fetch.
We got the poor man's brainstorm going on here.
Opt.
Opt is interesting.
It's essentially opt at that point.
It really is.
It is an opt for 0.
You do have to have the fetch land up for it, but the fetch land is what turns brainstorm into instant speed ponder. And it has a similar effect here when in conjunction with the Mishra's Baubles. But the secret third mode of Mishra's Bauble is when you play 2 of them and crack them on the first turn, then you've got a turn 2 Grim Lavamancer activation.
You can do that with 2 fetches.
Yeah, but he did it with 2 Mishra's Baubles. So now we've got an activation and a half. So all he has to do is throw 1 more card in there, and he's got the first 2 threats dealt with. Easy.
Nate decided that he didn't want the top card. He's going to draw a card now, another Mishra's Bauble. When Opt first got printed into Modern, these... Ooh, and that's a rest in peace. I think we're going to see a Grim...
development.
We're going to see a Grim Lavamancer activation, taking out either the Ornithopter or the Memnite.
I want to say Ornithopter, but
I also would want to say. I would also want to say.
And we're going
Ornithopter because it's a flyer.
Having 1 power is not as important as having flying in Austin's deck. Because
I agree.
You get cards that say artifact creatures you control get +1/+1 in Master of Ethereum, and you've got cranial plating.
Another shock here, a swing for 1.
Yeah, the rest in pieces just makes Grim Lavamancer embarrassing.
But like I was saying, when Opt first got printed into Modern, Shadow incorporated into their deck because it was instant speed. It let them hold up removal, and then they can opt.
And then you get the opt, snap, opt at your opponent's end step. That's what I like.
That is something that it has over the Mishra's Bauble, is that you can flash it back. However, they've moved to the Mishra's Bauble simply because it's free. It, in conjunction with the fetch land, is basically opt. It fills up your graveyard.
Now, my preference is Mishra's Bauble in decks that want to try and traverse the Ulvenwald, so you get like your Sultai Shadows.
It is stronger in that. Okay, well, Nate's not messing around with these like low toughness decks. Here we see an Is It Staticaster that is big game against Affinity. Everything in the deck, with the exception of like Master of Ethereum and Ornithopter, has 2 toughness.
And you want to look at Nate's hand. We've got an Anger and a Kolaghan's Command.
Well,
so Nate needs to stick 1 threat, and I think he gets to run away with this game with 2 to 3 well-timed sweepers.
We also saw Austin keep a no-lander. He drew the Darksteel Citadel.
Right. Yeah, the Darksteel Citadel is randomly a wonderful card. If Nate's obviously not doing this, but if we're playing against like blue-white control, they don't.
Here we see a Galv Blast. That's just going to get this Is It Staticaster off the board. Nate is contemplating whether or not he wants to Street Wraith and draw and he is contemplating whether or not he wants to draw into a Stubborn Denial.
Absolutely.
With the Street Wraith, he decides not to. It was a fatal. He draws Fatal Push, so there's the Fatal Push in his deck.
I think Nate is really much more happy with that Galvanic Blast going at one of his creatures than at his face. you know, as the shadow player, you want to be able to float at 4 or 5 life because that's when you are at your absolutely most powerful.
You want to decide when you're losing life.
That said, we have not actually seen a Death Shadow yet in this match. We might have spoken too soon, but we also haven't seen a Delver.
I haven't seen a Shadow in months. They seem to just never have them. It's interesting.
And that's where the Traverse comes in. From the Sultai decks. That's what I like to see. I'm not a big fan of the Grixis Shadow deck personally, but that's because it usually beats me. So
I have no doubt that he has a playset of them in his deck. We've just yet to see one.
Absolutely. And we know he's got a Tasker and it looks like a Gurmag Angler in his hand.
So there's the Tasker.
2 cards that generally equate to be 2-for-1s in the form of Anger of the Gods and Kolaghan's Command. And I'm not sure what the 5th card is. We've got 5, and I know what 4 of them are. So Nate looks like he's starting to play a little bit more on the conservative side with his life total. He has taken the back foot. His game plan is no longer power out a win condition. He is now trying to tempo Austin, and he's probably going to stick one of these Delve threats much later in the game, as there is, in fact, a Rest in Peace in play. And we're just going to see lots of 1-for-1s coming out of Nate's hand until Austin tries to stabilize, at which time I think that the 2-for-1s, I'll start coming out.
And the conservative plays on Nate's part are because his threats that he's drawing, they cost 6-7 mana.
And with the Rest in Peace out, you don't get to cheat those in.
No, he has to hardcast them. At this point, he can hardcast the Street Wraith, which I'm pretty sure he has one.
I think that's probably a better choice than cycling with it. So we had an Arcbound Ravager coming out, which is rough stuff. Nate really needs to get that off the field, because if he can get that off the field,
there's a Stubborn Denial,
and then drop an Anger, then we're in pretty good shape.
I'm a little surprised to see the Stubborn Denial still in the deck, as it only counters Cranial Plating.
Galvblast. But that's not as relevant.
How many Galvblast does Austin still have in his deck?
I want to say he probably still has 2.
Yeah.
Galvblast is just a ridiculously good card. It's Lightning Bolt +2.
Right, it's fine. You can shave some, like, for Dispatch.
For sure. And this is definitely a matchup. We see Austin's playing with the white splash in the form of the basic planes that I'm 90% sure I saw. So Dispatch is definitely a solid possibility coming out of Austin's deck.
Yeah, Dispatch is... When you have Metalcraft, it's
solid.
It's Path to Exile with no downside.
Absolutely.
We see a second Rest in Peace. I'd love for him to play that just to kind of put it in.
And that's the awkward part.
In there.
That's the awkward part of Rest in Peace. Now he has a second one, so he gets to do nothing with that, really.
Yeah, the second one is not doing anything.
Yeah, so Nate had the option to Stubborn Denial that. However, Nate did not have the Ferocious clause, meaning that Austin would have just been able to tap that, Springleaf Drum and that Memnite to pay for it. Now
he couldn't have then equipped on the same turn, but I don't think that's worth a card.
You are absolutely right. I agree. I think Nate wants that stub to really do some work here. But
I'm not in love with this Anger here. It's getting one creature. Nate's losing a creature as well. Nate has a Kolaghan's Command. He couldn't blow up the Cranial Plating at his leisure.
Absolutely.
So I'm a little confused to see
I think the Kolaghan's Command would have been a better play in that scenario. You
hold up the Kolaghan's Command for this.
Exactly. You get to kill the land and pop the plating.
Yeah. And here he's taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 unnecessarily.
And he's going to go down to 6 most likely here.
Yep. That was 6 life he could have easily prevented.
Being at 6 isn't terrible. So he still has the Kolaghan's Command in his hand. It looks like he still has that Stubborn Denial in his hand. So we've got...
He just gets to do it. He gets to do it now.
Instead, yeah. I still think it would have been better last turn on this and just leave the Memnite alive.
You can save the Anger of the Gods to when Austin commits more threats to the board.
Absolutely. Now, Austin having this Inkmoth Nexus is much better for Nate than Austin would really like. So there's the Shadow. There's the big boy,
Shadow.
Which is a 7/7, I want to say.
Yep.
It's a 7/7. So with this Inkmoth Nexus out, Austin now has to hit Nate 10 times with that instead of the normal 6 that would be for a Blinkmoth Nexus.
Yep, save drawing into a Ravager or a Blinkmoth, because Blinkmoth's secondary mode is to pump other
Inkmoth Nexus
is to pump other Blinkmoths.
Absolutely, and that's the upside to having multiples.
Yep. Even when Affinity floods out, their lands are creatures.
It really, yeah, absolutely. Those creature lands are really important.
We see from the removal heavy decks, they spend the entire game killing all of the creatures that are on board, and then the Affinity player still has their man lands. Nate's done an excellent job this game of keeping Austin down, making sure his threats don't stick.
Yeah.
I've really been impressed with Nate's removal suite.
Nate's draws have really lined up here.
He came very prepared for this matchup. It is a tough one. I'm not surprised to see Austin get the first game there.
Yeah, it looks like,
but
yeah,
Nate just Nate's sideboard was unbeatable.
Yeah, it looks like Austin offered the hand as soon as I think he realized that he was done for. Whether or not he saw Nate's hand. Nate still had some action in his hand, but Austin gave up the GGs, and that's going to be 2-1 to Nate Lang in round 1.
Yeah, Austin's draw was rough there. It happens when with a highly synergistic deck like Affinity. Games 2 and 3, you're taking out synergy and you're bringing in interaction.
Absolutely.
You're taking out the synergy that might not matter as much. Threats that don't line up as well, that are going to be dealt with very easily, and you're bringing in disruption that hopefully is more impactful. But what happens there is we saw Austin draw the 2 rest in peace, and the second one's a dead draw. So that's it for this round. We're gonna get we'll have more for you here in a bit. Let us know in the comments if there's any particular match you'd like to see,
and we'll see what we can do.
Let us know if there are any M19 cards you're excited about. Maybe we can get a deck with some of those in it. I know personally I'm excited about the Supreme Phantom. It's Supreme or nothing.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you in a bit. I pulled a foil spell.